Hello, I'm Tony Trongone, Superintendent of Pemberton Township Schools. I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Inside Outlook. In this episode, we are continuing our discussion regarding the budget process for the upcoming school year. Joining me today is our Business Administrator, Dan Smith, who's going to give a preview of the 2021 school budget and explain some of the financial challenges our school district is facing in the upcoming years. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you.
So at the board meeting in November, you explained a lot to the board, and at the board meeting we have a pretty good showing of people, but not a broad audience like we do on Channel 19 or on our website. So I'm welcome, and I want to ask you to give us a review of what you talked about at the board meeting on November 21st.
Okay. Yeah, we went over a lot of our revenue issues that we're facing coming up with the next budget, and we talked about state aid and municipal overburden and state aid differential. So we'll get into that with our PowerPoint presentation.
All right, let's see.
Okay. So the first thing we wanted to talk about are some major budget dates coming up. So in February, we'll receive our state aid figures from the state. And that really is going to give us a true indication of what our state aid is and where we lie in terms of the state aid funding formula. On March 20th, our preliminary budget is due to the state for initial presentation to the county. And then on April 30th is our tentative date for our public hearing, which is when our budget will be approved for the 2021 school year. So some major topics we discussed are changes in state aid, revisiting S2, which is a reduction in adjustment aid for the district, municipal overburden, the tax levy, and state military aid.
So I got a question for you. What is adjustment aid again? So refresh the memory of our audience.
So adjustment aid is aid that the district has received in the past, where it kind of bridges the gap between our district and other districts. So the state has different funding formulas for different areas of the budget. And our district was short, and being a former Abbott, we received adjustment aid, which would bring us up to par with our competing districts.
Mm-hmm. So we're getting more than we should have been getting?
Correct. So
that's somebody else's opinion, not ours, right?
Correct. So as part of the Abbott ruling, based on our enrollment, our demographics, we were given adjustment aid to bring our aid levels up to a level where our students were offered the same experiences and instruction and education as more affluent districts.
Okay, but now they want to take that away.
Correct.
And they call that adjustment aid.
Correct.
All right, thanks.
So for 2019 through 2020, we're receiving about $78 million in state aid. And we highlighted two areas. One is adjustment aid, which you just spoke about. That is going to be decreased by the state. And the other we wanted to touch on was special education. So the state funds special education students based on census data and not your actual enrollment. So there was talks from the state about increasing that allocation, but those talks have broken down, and we were told that that's not going to be a possibility for 2020, 2021. So hopefully in the future that comes through and we'll receive more funding for our special education population, but going forward we are planning to see no increase in that area.
Okay.
So revisiting S2. So in the past couple of years, we've spoken about our reduction in adjustment aid. So it started with a 5% reduction, 13%, and now in 2021, we're going to have a 23% reduction in our adjustment aid. And that's bad as it is, but we have 4 more years of that. And as you can see, the percentages get higher each year. So the goal of the state was that after 7 years, your adjustment aid will be brought down to the allowable amount, or what the state feels is the allowable amount. So for us, that's roughly $4.6 million for the 2020-2021 budget. So our state aid differential is about $20.3 million. 23% of that is $4.6 million. So
you just said $26 million, and now it's $20 million. Is that because it's been a couple of years now and they've reduced it to a certain amount?
Correct. So right, we're going into year 3 now of S2. So we have had 2 years of reductions already. So all that comes into account. So when the law was first enacted, we were roughly $26 million, what the state would call overfunded. Now that number is down to about $20 million going into next year. So that's what our cut is based on. Okay. That differential. One area of S2 that we would benefit from is municipal overburden. So that is where the district tax rate is greater than the state average. So if you're a former Abbott and your district tax rate is greater than the state average, then you're reduced based on your over adequacy amount and not your state aid differential, which for us is about 50% less. So you can see last year we were at 99.432% of the state average. So we missed it by 1.3 cents. So if we had a tax rate that was 1 cent higher, we would have had half the state aid reduction than we saw last year.
And I see here you have SDA district. So what is SDA compared to Abbott?
SDA district means you're a former Abbott. So the Abbott designation was removed, and those districts who were designated as Abbotts are now considered SDA districts, which puts us in a different category as far as funding capital projects and state aid and things of that nature. So we are still treated a little differently, but we're technically not an Abbott district anymore.
So because we're an SDA district, this comes into play?
Correct.
So it doesn't come into play for other districts, just for former Abbott districts?
Correct.
Okay.
So it's part of the law that was implemented to help the former Abbott districts.
Okay.
So here we can see if our reduction is based on state aid differential, we would lose that 4.6 million we previously spoke about. But if we hit municipal overburden, then our reduction is based on our over adequacy, which we're estimating at about 10.6 million. So 23% of that is 2.4 million, which is a big change in reduction. So you can see it's about $2.2 million in aid that we would maintain if we were to hit municipal overburden. So it is a big number, and it's very important to the district.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads into the tax levy. So we started a plan a couple years ago to gradually increase the tax levy at a reasonable percentage to close our local fair share. So the local fair share is the amount of money that the state says your local taxpayers should be contributing to your budget. And we are under that by about $10 million. So as you can see here, we have a plan to increase the levy 9% through the continuance of S2, so that when S2 ends, we'll be at our local fair share. So that will help us close the budget gap and also get us to where we need to be as far as the state is concerned for local fair share, because that does affect other areas of the budget and the district, whether or not the district is at its local fair share or not.
So I'm looking at that percent increase, and I'm wondering if I'm the typical homeowner in Pemberton Township, Pemberton Borough, what does that look like for me as far as a cost per year?
It's roughly about $120 increase per year. So we don't have the final numbers yet. We'll have those in January.
Okay.
But if we're going based on the current budget we had about a 7.5% increase, and that was about $110 on the local taxpayer per year.
Okay.
One area we're also working on is state military aid. So we've been having a lot of talks with the state regarding this, and this would help bridge the gap between our federal aid that we receive for our military-connected students and the state aid the local tax levy. So our military-connected students don't necessarily pay property taxes. So we receive what's called impact aid from the federal government, which is in lieu of property taxes. The problem that we have is that our local taxpayers are contributing more to the budget than impact aid is contributing for that set of students. So the state is helping us close that gap where they said, we'll fund you the difference between what your local taxpayers are giving you per student and what the federal government is giving you per student, and we'll call that military aid. So
that sounds fair.
It is. It's a fair proposition. We have been working hard with the state on that. We're hopeful that at some point this month it'll be approved. That's what we've been told, December of 2019. But the final calculation isn't set, and that's been the major holdup. One of the problems with impact aid is there's a 2-year lag. So we get our initial payment in that current budget year, but then the federal government takes 2 years to close out. So we may get residual payments throughout the 2 years. So we don't want to get into a position where the state provides funding and then we become overfunded because we get an additional federal payment. So that's what we're working on with the state, and that's been the major holdup with funding this. So we're estimating that could possibly be about $1 million in new revenue for us that we don't have in our current budget. So along with those revenue items, we also have rollover expenses. So salaries increase annually, health benefits increase annually, and required expenses such as insurance, fuel costs, maintenance costs, things like that. So in addition to the revenue, we have expenses that we can't reduce. So this is a summary to show our two scenarios. So scenario A is if we do not hit municipal overburden, and you can see we have total reductions of about 6.4 million. Scenario B is with the district reaching municipal overburden, and our total reductions will be 4.2 million in that scenario.
So can you repeat that for me? Because again, for the local viewer, they're saying, well, hold on, we could get $4.6 million in state aid cut, or you can see on the right side, $2.4 million cut, but why is it increase again? Why do we have to make more cuts than what the state aid would reduce our state aid in?
Because not only are we reducing our state aid, but our expenses are increasing as well. So such as salaries. So if you kind of picture a household budget, if your income goes down but your electric bill goes up, that creates a bigger gap than just your income going down. So that's what we're focused on. We're looking at the necessities such as salaries, benefits, insurance, those types of expenses, plus the reduction of our revenue comes to our total budget reduction amount of roughly 6.4 million.
Okay.
So plan to close the budget gap. We're still continuing to network with our legislators and other districts. We're looking at efficiencies based on the opening of the new Denbo Crichton School. We're looking at administrative cuts, personnel reductions, and line item reductions throughout the budget. We're still working with our administration to discuss reductions, review line item budgets with our finance committee, and we'll also do another report out to the board at the January 23rd, 2020
So let's go back then. So we have, I don't want to confuse people with, we have expenses that will increase no matter what because of salaries, but we're going to have to cut people.
Correct.
So the people who stay, their salaries increase, but then we have to make cuts to offset all those, the reduction of state aid plus the increase in all the salaries, benefits, and other expenses. So I don't want anybody to misunderstand the fact that salaries increase, but in order to balance the budget, we do have to make personnel cuts.
Correct. We're a very labor-intensive business, if we want to look at it as a business perspective. So 80% of our budget is salaries and benefits. So when you're cutting 6.4 million, or roughly 7% of the budget, there's no other area to cut but personnel reductions.
Okay.
And of course, we want to minimize those reductions. We'll look at attrition and things like that. But ultimately, yes, we have to look at personnel reductions.
Okay. Well, Dan, I want to say thanks. I think this is a second step for us in this process for this year. But also the board mentioned we're developing a plan in for multiple years that's going to unfold over time with the changes that are coming from the state in regard to state funding. But also what we do to provide our kids with the best education possible. We're going to make sure that we put the money in the classroom, and that's our goal. And then provide a safe and orderly learning environment. So we're going to do that. And then there's one more thing that's that you didn't mention. So there's projects that are going on, physical projects. They call it, in our terms, capital projects. Mm-hmm. So people are confused. They're going, if we're getting money cut, we're getting state aid cut, why are we getting these things, capital improvements done to the buildings? How's that being paid?
There's a couple areas. We have our maintenance reserve account. Right. Which is kind of like a savings account where the district over time has put money into this reserve, and it can only be pulled out for maintenance and capital projects.
So you can't take that money out and plug the budget for regular operating budget?
Correct. Once it goes into that savings account, it can only be pulled out for capital projects.
Okay.
So we have a long-term plan to make improvements to the buildings. A lot of our projects that are going on right now are projects that have been in the works for a couple of years now, and they're just now wrapping up. We had a huge security project at the high school. That was a grant given to us by the county. So that didn't
come out of maintenance reserve?
Nope. And that was a special revenue. It came from the county, and it could only be used on security upgrades. So a lot of the money that's used for the projects are what we would call restricted, where we receive it and it can only be used for specific items or purposes. So that's our plan going forward. We're working with our engineer and our architect to determine a priority list. And then once the new school is finished, our goal is to reach out to the SDA and apply for additional assistance from the state to complete even more projects.
That's good to know. So, again, there's one side of it is saying that we're going to have reduction in state aid. We're going to have to make cuts to our general programs, and that includes people. But then on the other hand is these physical projects, capital projects that we're doing. And I want to make sure the public realizes that there are two different buckets of funding, and we're restricted, as you said.
Correct.
Okay. One more last question. What's next for us? For you with the board, what's in January for us? You're going to be presenting to the board again, right?
Right. So in January, we'll meet with the Finance Committee and look at departmental budgets. And then on January 23rd at the public board meeting, we'll do an update to the full board on any information that we've gained since our last meeting. So we may have information on military aid, information on the tax levy, possibly some preliminary information on state aid from the state. So whatever we can gather between then and now, we'll present to the board on the 23rd and make sure everyone is kept up to speed and is informed of what we know when we know it.
All right, thanks, Dan. And thanks for bringing all this to our attention. I appreciate all your hard work and your diligence in this area.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. And please be sure to check back often as we continue to keep you updated on our school budget process. That's our show for today, and we look forward to seeing you again on the next edition of Inside Outlook. Merry Christmas and have a Happy New Year.